Welcome to this edition of the Finnish Internet Forum. My name is Yrjö Länsipuro. I'm the vice chair of the Finnish section or Finnish chapter of the Internet Society. Finnish Internet Forum is one of the children of Internet Governance Forum, which is a global thing, as you certainly know, and its roots go back to the WSIS World Summit in Information Society, which set up the IGF as a forum for discussion about the internet. And as I said, Finnish Internet Forum is one of the, I think, hundreds of events and fora which are successors and children of the IGF. Okay, the moderator is the chair of the ISOC Finland, Finnish chapter of the Internet Society, Julf, Helsingius.
Thank you, Yrjö. And yes, welcome to everybody on my behalf as well, wherever you are in the world. So good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whatever. Thank you for joining us. The theme for this is Internet at War. And my first contact with electronic warfare and cyber warfare was in the 80s when the technology looked like this. These days it's a little bit more modern than this. This was actually an electronic warfare vehicle that has been replaced now by a smartphone application. So very briefly, before we go to the panel, I just wanted to mention one initiative that I sort of discussed last week at the RIPE meeting, which is very interesting. There's a bunch of people in the internet community that realize that it's really important to keep the internet going in Ukraine despite all the damage that's been caused to it. And they actually started this action where they went through a lot of vendors, went through a lot of network providers and asked, do you have any spare equipment? Do you have any tools for fixing fibers and so on? Collecting it and kept driving their trucks mainly from Germany, but around a lot of European countries to Ukraine and providing equipment to the poor guys these guys here are actually splicing an optic fiber that's been blown up by artillery barrage. Those are not the perfect working conditions to splice fibers, I can tell you. So, the main feature of today is the panel with some very distinguished guests, and I will let you panelists introduce yourselves, so please if you can come and join me here on the stage. And Mikko, if you start, please.
Well, thank you, Julf. Thanks to all of you for joining us live here today, and thanks for all of you online as well. My name is Mikko Hyppönen. I am the Chief Research Officer for the largest cybersecurity company in the Nordics. The company used to be called F-Secure, but now it's called WithSecure because the company is splitting into the largest cybersecurity company in the Nordics and into the second largest cybersecurity company in the Nordics. F-Secure for consumer products and services and WithSecure for enterprise products and services. I've been working with the company for 31 years, during which time I've mostly been tracking organized online crime gangs, but also nation-state attacks. And for the last 3 months, I've been tracking what's been happening regarding the Russian aggression in Ukraine.
Well, hello, my name is Catharina Candolin. I currently work at the OP Financial Group, so I'm in the finance sector. But before that, I was almost 15 years in the defense sector, so I was working at the Finnish Defense Forces, and I was also the chief of the cyber defense section. And 3 years I spent at NATO HQ, also working with policy issues in cyber defense.
Hi, my name is Peter Sund. I'm the CEO of Finnish Information Security Cluster, which is a lobby organization for the cyber industry in Finland. FISC, as we like to call it, operates under the technology industries of Finland. Thank you.
Thank you. So, looking at Internet at War, there's so many aspects we could discuss, starting from all the sort of information warfare going on in the social networks, looking at sort of how there are cyber attacks, looking at how armies use the internet to actually conduct war. And Then also how vulnerable our infrastructure is, both in terms of non-internet infrastructure that can be affected through the internet, but then also really physical assets like optical fibers, which for Finland, the critical fibers really run under the water, and so we don't have too many of them, so that's definitely a vulnerability. So feel free to sort of whichever of these you want to sort of start picking apart.
If we want to define a little bit about the words around the topic, I think we should do that first, because war is such a strong word, and especially in mainstream media, the topics around online attacks and nation state attacks, we see strong words like cyber war being used all too easily. I've seen them used for a decade, typically to characterize an espionage attack from one country to another using online methods. And espionage is not war. Spying is not war. Intelligence gathering is not war, yet it's often called a war. What's happening right now in Ukraine clearly is a war being played out on land, on sea, in air, in space, and in cyberspace. And the cyberspace element of that war could be and should be categorized as cyber war, but it's not a separate phenomenon. It's part of the overall conflict, and that's the way we should be thinking about. I think we should be thinking about cyber war to begin with.
No, that's a very good. So, yes, thank you. So.
Yes, I agree very much with Mikko that we should not talk about cyber war, and actually the armed forces don't really talk about cyber war. We're talking about cyber operations, and cyber operations are done and conducted as part of warfare. And it seems that also cyber operations is now becoming mature enough to be seen as part of conventional warfare. So yeah, I agree on the terminology aspect.
Okay, as long as we please don't call it a special operation.
Certainly will not. Yeah, also from my side, it's easy to agree with the fact that cyber war is not really a suitable term. Furthermore, so maybe to clarify the point is that it's also a fact that when you go deep into the meaning of war itself and the associated international law that we all operate within, the fact is that only states can be in war. Companies cannot. So when any private companies are sort of using or referring to this, it's not purely correct in that sense either. What I would like to maybe highlight also is just very briefly touching on our topic, that is visual behind us is that internet at war. That's a very wise formulation of the issue that we have at hand, because the term "at" is maybe one of those, let's say, focus points where we might be leading this discussion here today. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so as we start picking things through, one thing where we could start with is talking about the internet. One thing, that topic that has been really on the surface has been discussion about sanctions. And for example, should we cut off internet access to Russia? Or should we sort of deregister the Russian domains or whatever? And there's been lots of, on the other hand, voices saying, yeah, we should really do that. But then also strong voices, especially from the internet community, saying, no, the internet is something that's beyond nation states, and we should not ever cut such a fundamental thing from any nation state for any reason. There is, of course, also the argument that sort of the fact that even the Russian soldiers still have internet access is generating so much wonderful proof for if there's ever going to be a court case in the International Court in The Hague. That's sort of great, give them more rope. It's sort of, I would like to hear your views.
I'd like to hear if you agree with me first on the technical part, that technically we could disconnect Russia from the rest of the internet. I believe we could. Do you agree?
We could to a large extent. We couldn't do it 100%, but we can do it so that most Russians would not have internet access beyond Russia.
Yes, 100% disconnection hasn't happened anywhere else either. But yes, for practical purposes, most of Russians would be offline. Now, so I think that like technically it's doable, and I would hate to see it happen. Now, I think we all here stand with Ukraine. I definitely stand with Ukraine. I definitely want to support them in any way possible, but I still don't think the right move for the West would be to sanction Russia off the internet. Internet is one of the very few truly and really global things we have. And I don't like any development which would turn it into disconnected islands, even in extreme scenario like this. And internet is also one of the very few things left which actually gives real unbalanced information to Russian citizens about what's really happening in Ukraine. It is a complex question, and it's almost too easy to jump into conclusions that let's sanction everything, including connectivity. And I think we shouldn't really do this unless we really think it through and really agree that it's the right thing to do. And right now, I don't think it would be the right thing to do.
I mean, Russia has even talked itself about maybe having this RUNET and kind of having their own Russian internet. And they have still not gone through with all this talk that they have been making. But I also agree with Mikko that it's something that we should not do, because one thing that would be crucial in Russia is for the citizens of Russia to get more information and get other information than what the state is providing them. And internet is perhaps the most powerful means to deliver information. And also, if you look at Kremlin and for Putin to stay in power or not stay in power, one of the crucial things would be for the citizens to be able to turn against Kremlin. But as long as the citizens support Kremlin, it's easier for Kremlin also to operate. So this whole information aspect, I think, is important. And internet, I believe, is the most powerful tool that we have to get through to Russian citizens.
Certainly so, and it's easy to agree on those points as well. If I'll take another aspect to sort of access to the internet, under the domain of United Nations, there has been work done or already sort of discussing about the meaning of internet to humanity and human rights, and there is a non-binding international legal document stating that access to internet is one of the modern human rights, and the declaration has been approved by the human rights arm of the United Nations. And although, of course, we all have to appreciate that it is a non-binding document, but it tells a story about the importance of connectivity. Some have argued that that's actually somehow preventing that it wouldn't allow internet to be shut down for a nation state or so. That's a little bit more difficult to maybe agree that is that, because if we think about all human rights, almost all, we have derogations from human rights. For example, if you commit a crime here in Finland, your freedom will be taken away from you, and you'll be put to prison and so on. So we have derogations, and internet certainly wouldn't be something that is so fundamental like the right to life and so on. But at the same time, it is something that should also be sort of maybe looked at from the fundamental rights perspective, additionally to what was mentioned, that the sort of information layer on the internet and so on. And furthermore, talking about terminology, if we would have a national internet of any nation state, I'm not sure, could we even call it internet? Internet is like when we have international, right. We have we have some kind of cross-border dimension. That would it then be called NatNet? Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yes.
I actually have a related question to you, Julf.
Sure.
Do you believe the stories from Russia about RUNet and about their capability to disconnect? Do you think it's real? And I'm referring to the two announcements they made during summer 2021, where they said that they successfully tested disconnecting from the rest of the internet and everything worked fine. We didn't see anything happening in any of the routing or anything in BGP or anywhere.
Yeah.
So are you buying that?
Yes and no. One hand, they're clearly exaggerating their own capabilities. That's become rather clear. But on the other hand, what they would need to do isn't that hard. It's pretty much what any big corporation is doing already anyway. And we do know they have replicated things like the name service. And they have basically started issuing their own certificates to be able to overrule the ones issued by ICANN, for example. But how successful they actually be in rolling out those certificates is very unclear. So if they would decide to do it today, they could have a working net, but it would be only working for some people and not everybody. So until they actually do it, we won't know for sure. They have the capability, but they hadn't had enough time to roll out the infrastructure for everybody to be on the new wonderful mirrored version.
And then they would learn exactly how well the Russian software development companies would work without access to GitHub.
Exactly, yes. Perfect example. I mean, this goes back to even a discussion I had long ago, just briefly after the Soviet Union had fallen, and people asked me, am I afraid that the old Soviet Union might come back? At that point, my answer was no, because the oligarchs wouldn't like their credit cards stop working. So, to pick up on some things that you said, well, firstly, especially for Yrjö and me, who actually been spending a lot of time trying to interface between the internet community and governments, and especially the UN, we also realized that UN is not always the friend of the internet community. And there are a lot of initiatives driven from the UN that are driven by countries like China, Russia, and India that actually really try to drive towards that separate islands of internet model. And yes, I totally agree with the definition. Then it's not an internet anymore. It is a fragmented, distributed something, but not the internet anymore. But that is very strongly how some countries in the UN are driving it.
Yeah, that's very well said. And to a certain extent, maybe we can differentiate at least sort of three dimensions from your comment. One being that it would be maybe useful for all of us to sort of recognize the fact that the UN is a collaboration platform of all nation states. And all nation states with that platform, they have the right to advance their own objectives, and they certainly do. And with that said, I think more responsibility instead of criticizing so much, let's say, authoritarian states trying to advance their own agenda, would be maybe to criticize ourselves, that the liberal Western democracies and so on, are we coming together on these issues to sort of protect against these kinds of objectives and sort of maintaining the ideals of the free and internet, and not only free but also reliable and many other terms that we can describe what the internet should actually be. Then there is also the issue that the internal workings of United Nations can sometimes be difficult, not only because of this political nature, but it is the sort of the best what the humanity has been able to come up with so far, with all its difficulties. And why I'm talking so much about this is that I have worked with the United Nations on several occasions, and I mean with United Nations as well. So I understand a little bit of the inner workings as well. Maybe also the public sphere, for example, here in Finland, we are not raising these issues at this level. For decades, I think Mikko is probably the best person to say that for decades we have actually been focusing on the technical aspect of security in the digital world. And it certainly, it hasn't gone anywhere, so it's equally important still. But we haven't sort of yet understood how much it changes human life and all the other layers that we have there.
Yeah, or we probably have realized it, but the sort of big, great public out there hasn't. It's sort of, they just take it for given. And this is something that we discuss a lot within the community, that sort of, we know what the internet means and how it works. But for most people there, it's just this obscure cloud that is there, just like electricity and water and everything, and who cares? Yes. I was also going to say, yes, you had a really good point about the fact that sort of, it's easy for us to criticize sort of totalitarian regimes or whatever. And at the same time, we're saying, yes, the internet is open and free as long as you don't violate any copyrights, as long as you don't, yes. So, yeah, we will have to look in the mirror too. By the way, for the audience, feel free to sort of, if you have any questions, sort of wave a hand or something, attract my attention. And we have a Twitter feed, so let me know if there's any sort of questions coming from the Twitter. So then maybe I would like to shift on to the sort of, we talked about, in the case of Russia, how important it is to get information to the Russian people. Then we have the whole question of disinformation, misinformation, and whatever. Would you like to sort of comment on that situation at all? It's clear, I mean, I think that what we all seen is the Ukrainians have managed a very good information warfare tactic, whereas Russians haven't done quite as well, except in their home market.
If I may start, again, I would not talk about information warfare, but information operations. And information operations as such, that's nothing new. As long as humankind has been waging war, there has been information operations. The things that have changed, though, happened around 2010 when the social media platforms emerged, because they created a new platform to really spread and propagate both misinformation and disinformation. And there you could see nation states affecting decision-making in other nation states. Two typical examples have been the decision of Brexit and also the United States presidential election in 2016. So when talking about information operations and cyber operations, a term that is now being used very often is hybrid operations, which is basically what you also see now in the war of Ukraine. So that first, before the kinetic things start to happen, you have both information operations and cyber operations. And then after a while, you start also with the conventional forms of warfare. So now you have both conventional ways and unconventional ways of waging war. Information operations is one part of this, just as the cyber operations are.
Right. Yeah, good point.
Yeah, and I think we were all, well, I guess majority of us were expecting Russia to be capable of showing more force in the real world. And I think the general consensus is that they are slowly but surely failing with their attack on Ukraine in the real world. And the same applies to the online world as well. Their cyber operations and their information operations, at least the ones we're able to monitor and see, don't seem to be making the mark. We had, I guess, we were much more scared of the St. Petersburg troll factory, having in mind the successful operations that Catharina mentioned, and they're nowhere to be found during the Ukraine conflict. Now, there's a couple of explanations which might be at play here. The easiest explanation would be that the forces are at play, but they're not targeting us. They're targeting people inside Russia. They're targeting minorities or language minorities, people in China, people in Africa. Here in Finland, for example, there seems to be much more misinformation targeting minorities who don't speak Finnish. And that's for us much harder to see. And that's also a clever way to wage the war. There's a war going on which we don't even see at all.
Yeah.
Maybe to continue with that is that, as Catharina well said, that information operations have existed since forever. At the same time, maybe we shouldn't also forget that information operations are ongoing also when there is no war. And that is something which also quite often is I don't want to say forgotten, but maybe goes unnoticed. And a lot of the actual work and the sort of reaping the benefits of that occurs way before, or it's also possible that the day of war never even occurs. But information operations certainly are ongoing, and I think we can say this out loud that Russia as a nation state and also its predecessor Soviet Union has been operating under this kind of doctrine for a very long time, and that also creates, of course, the potential success or successes from their perspective, because it's part of daily operations. If you really think about it, that when there is a government agency responsible of implementing information operations all the time, and then there are people being employed and doing that as their daily job, of course, like any organization, they develop and get better at it, and that's also something that we shouldn't forget. Of course, the targets change, the topics change. It's also two-dimensional, that some of it for domestic purposes and some of it to sort of disrupt or somehow create uncertainty or confusion within the societies of the target states.
If I may continue from that, then it's very good that you brought up this point about this information operations going on already in peacetime or hybrid operations. And this is exactly why experts are talking about updating our legislation, especially when it comes to our law of preparedness, valmiuslaki, because the problem today is that it's very conventional. So it recognizes peacetime, it recognizes time of conflict, and it recognizes times of war. But now when these hybrid operations are going on already in peacetime, it doesn't give the mandate to the authorities to operate. And it takes a very long time before we are going over to the stages of conflict, etc. So the legislation should be updated to understand also these hybrid threats that we see.
And according to Russia, it's not even a war. It's just an operation.
Exactly.
But we do have to give full points for execution for the information operations coming out from Ukraine. The propaganda and the memes they've been able to generate and distribute worldwide are quite amazing indeed. And they work. I see them myself. Like I feel that I agree. I keep nodding myself to the memes of Ukrainian farmers stealing tanks with tractors. That they're very, very nice. Or fuck you, Russian warship. Yeah. I see T-shirts with that text. And that means that the Ukrainian meme forces are in full effect and very successful in their operations. Propaganda works much better when we agree with the propaganda.
Yes, and sorry, I just want to say, I would love to see how well it has worked in Africa and Asia. But sorry.
No, I was just going to say that it's about winning hearts and minds, and that Ukraine is really doing.
Oh, yes. We have a Twitter question.
Okay, so this question is from the livestream.com platform. How do you think the war will transform the policies by Apple and manufacturers in the Android ecosystem regarding the responses to sanctions and complying with national regulation?
Anyone wanting to take a cut?
I missed the first part of the question. That
how will the war transform policy?
Okay, I can't, at least from my perspective, I'm not able to speak about the companies as a group they are certainly different, and they have different market mechanism as well. Apple operates completely differently from Google and so on. But but one thing is that these sort of if we take the hyperscale companies in general who are offering digital services to a wide variety of users, be it private users or companies, governments, and so on. At least from my perspective, I can see that there may be a shift happening now on, let's say, I don't know if this is an appropriate term in this moment to use, but this kind of a global corporate citizenship, meaning that these companies might be looking at more carefully on how they stand with the sort of what are the rules they want to support, and what is the ethical basis of such. It remains to be seen, of course, but there are maybe weak signals at least.
Well, I think one thing that is happening is that there's a lot of discussion at what are the responsibilities of these companies. And for example, when we talked about information operations, what is the responsibility of the company to actually do something about if they notice that there's disinformation going on? On the other hand, then you have the other group talking about freedom of speech. So where is the line between freedom of speech and actually very harmful disinformation? So this is a discussion that it's actually ongoing now, because there has been these claims that the social media companies should do more. So I have no clear question what they should do or what they will do, but the discussion is at least ongoing.
If I understood the question correctly, it was in particular about mobile players, so Apple and the iPhone ecosystem, and Google or Alphabet and the Android ecosystem. And I'm not really sure what will happen there and how that will change. I guess mostly it would be about which applications would be allowed in which app stores, in which countries. Don't really know if that's going to change much, but I also don't think it's the most interesting part about how companies will change their attitudes. The biggest Silicon Valley or US West Coast technology companies are as big as countries. Their revenues, much less their market caps, are much bigger than small countries are. They do public policy, they have public policy departments, they lobby heavily, they try to set laws. Of course, they don't like themselves to be characterized like that, but that's what they are. And interestingly, this year has, as far as I know, shown for the first time some of these companies actively engage in the conflict, engage in the war, not in fighting the war, but in building defenses. Both Google and Microsoft, not Apple, but Google and Microsoft have been very active in defending Ukrainian infrastructure against Russian aggression. And they themselves describe this as supporting their clients and customers and supporting Western values and freedom, not about fighting a war, not about fighting military attacks from Russia. But that's basically what they're doing when they're defending Ukrainian infrastructure against Russian cyber weapons waged by the Russian government. And I don't think we've ever seen this before. I think this is the very first conflict where we see big Western companies take a stand and participate in the active conflict like this. I do think it's quite historic.
Very well said, Mikko, and maybe 2 points came to my mind to continue on that. Is that certainly they do have the kind of public policy shaping department and efforts as well, and but at the same time, well, first of all, because my work is lobbying work, so I know roughly how it works, and
we'll allow it.
Thank you. And what I can at least reaffirm is that it's not shady or something that happens in the dark corners and so on. And there is maybe even some proof of that. These companies that we were referring to earlier, they put almost 30 million euros worth lobbying within European Union, just only for the, let's say, those critical EU regulation projects, the Digital Markets Act and Digital Services Act and so on, and they were not successful. So European Union legislators did not accept the arguments, essentially. And so it also means that it's not that money talks. It's quite often is the strongest argument may actually work, and that brings me a lot of reassurance as well, that that these companies are not dictators like in authoritarian countries, the presidents or kings or whoever. So which is a good thing, because public policy and politics, this is managing our common affairs and issues. Yes.
Yes, well, Mikko said that this is the first time that companies to this scale is participating, but this is also the first time that we see cyber operations as part of conventional warfare on this scale. So I guess that's natural. But this will be the new normal, because if you look at how nation states and armed forces have been developing what we call cyber defense, it's seen as the cyber domain is seen as one operational domain that is comparable to land, sea, air, and space. And so the armed forces are developing their capabilities accordingly. So basically the capabilities are intelligence, and that's also very much about preparing the battlefield, so to say. So not only collecting information, but kind of keeping the foot in the door should you need to. Then it's offensive operations, so offensive capabilities, and then defensive capabilities, which is basically the ability to defend oneself against the intelligence and offensive operations by an adversary. So this is something that most armed forces have been developing. Some have even been using, as we see now in this war, is being used, not to such a big success or as big a success that we were maybe expecting, especially expecting from Russia. But I would say that this is only the beginning, but this is going to be the new normal. So in future wars, the cyber element, I believe, is going to be mature and be seen as equal to land, sea, air, and space defense.
Maybe very briefly, adding something that actually what you said reminded me of. This is actually a very good point coming from Oulu University, is that not only in Ukraine but everywhere else, that our societies are not like the Death Star in Star Wars. So there is no huge spark plug anywhere that if you destroy that one, then the whole system will explode and collapse in totality. So modern societies are not they are more resilient than the Death Star was. And that's also a good thing.
Okay, so
so we had a question from the Twitter, and the question is that in today's theater of war, which are the key digital assets to be safeguarded by a nation state? And there's actually one suggestion from another user. There would be identification services, national public services, and other public services, because of the huge amount of data they hold on us. And could you answer, please? Thank you.
I'll answer the first question. I think the main national assets is our critical infrastructure. So we are talking about, for example, electricity, telecommunication, logistics, financial sector, and so on and so forth. And also the critical infrastructure, it's dependent on technology, but the critical infrastructures are also dependent on each other. And I would say that, for example, in countries in the north, it would be very difficult if the power is cut, for example, in January when it's cold. And also you could mess up a society pretty badly by targeting the financial sector. If people can't get money out of the bank accounts, or, for example, the cards are not working, it will not take many days before we have riots in the street because people need food. And so on. And even if they would have money to go to the store, then what if the store systems do not work, or even if the store systems do work, but what if we don't get the food or the supplies out of the containers that are sitting in the harbors because their systems are disrupted? So I would say that critical infrastructure would be the main asset, and this is also one thing that you see in the operational thinking of many armed forces, is that the critical infrastructure is the target.
Maybe to continue very briefly on that, is that when we use this kind of listing, which certainly is really appropriate, but there is one aspect which is not so clear, I think, at least for a wider audience, is that critical infrastructure, when we talk about telecommunications and then networks themselves, like it was mentioned here in the beginning, they certainly are critical. But at the same time, we should maybe understand that the aspect of digital computer systems, they are the one which are running all of our critical infrastructure, and also the ones who are operating them. Companies, be it a logistics company or a food producing operator or a bank or whatever, they are all running digital now. And for me, it's getting more and more difficult to actually say where the threshold or where the border between critical infrastructure and non-critical actually is.
I write about this a bit in my book, which came out in Finnish last year, will come out in English in August, where I compare the revolution where we are right now to the revolution which started 150 years ago with electric grids. Like connectivity is going to be exactly as necessary as electricity is today. Connectivity isn't yet as critical, but it will be. In 20, 30 years, it will be as critical as electricity. In fact, eventually a connectivity cut is going to cut electricity, which is going to be wild. Because of course, right now, an electricity cut will cut connectivity. Routers don't work without power. But what I'm saying is that eventually everything, all the devices we run, will require connectivity in order to function, and that eventually is going to affect our electricity grid itself. So a connectivity cut will cut power, which is going to be weird, but it's going to happen. Mark my words, when it happens, remember I said it first. If it doesn't happen, never mind.
Yes, I know we have a question there, but I would still like to continue a little bit as we are on protecting infrastructure. I see interesting discussions taking, there's two extremes. I know some of the people who worked with securing, especially the websites and everything infrastructure in Ukraine. And they really, the first thing they wanted was duplicate and replicate everything outside Ukraine. Basically, their credo was take everything you can from inside Ukraine and put it outside in a replicated way. But then also almost the opposite view. For example, here in Finland, there's a lot of discussion about shouldn't we control our own infrastructure? Isn't too much of it already with external players outside Finland and even outside Europe? So I would just love to hear your comments on this uneasy balance.
Well, I can start. The challenge with that is that if we limit our discussion on the general level, like it was formulated as the question here, there won't be an intelligent answer. And the problem with that is that because we have different risks, so it's not the same risk. For let's say, for data availability, having replicated data outside of the jurisdiction of a nation state is definitely the way to go. But at the same time, when we are doing this, we are creating other risks. Then we are talking about confidentiality risk. So when the data is under the jurisdiction of any other nation state, it is essentially subject to the legislation there. And that raises a lot of concerns, especially for the ones who are responsible for the, let's say, higher levels of classified information. owned by the government. And also, of course, companies do worry about the same issue in terms of their trade secrets and things like that. So we would have to sort of bring these risks together and analyze the importance and any given scenario, because it may be that when we are moving towards, like Catharina said earlier here, when we are moving towards a situation where we would have to operate under our preparedness regulation, or even war regulation, it might be that the level of risk shifts so heavily that we can do things that we wouldn't do in normal circumstances. But we haven't had this discussion widely, I think, yet. And I really think we should.
I think for most organizations, most companies, and most public sector organizations, the level of data security increases when you move your services and your data to a cloud provider. Because most companies can't invest the level of expertise and the level of money into securing their own on-premise services or their own private clouds compared to the big cloud players. So it's quite clear that in almost all cases, cybersecurity itself increases when you move into cloud services. Then the question is, what about confidentiality? And there the question really is, which cloud are we talking about? It actually becomes more of a political decision that if you're going to go to cloud, which cloud? Because there is a difference whether you will be using Alibaba Cloud or Yandex Cloud, as opposed to, let's say, Hötzner Cloud or AWS or Google or Microsoft. So it really depends on which cloud you're using. In all of these cases, cybersecurity is probably better than trying to run the data and the services by yourself. But confidentiality will be vastly different whether you go to a service that you trust or service that you can't trust.
I would like to disagree just for entertaining values, but I cannot disagree with this. However, let's put it this way. Information is not created equal. Some information is maybe more critical than other, and the confidentiality of that information is also, the confidentiality of information can also be time-bound, so some information can be very secret right now, but not so much in 3 years. So there is no one truth, what is better than the other. There's the questions of availability and the questions about confidentiality and integrity. So one size does not fit all. Some solutions, it might be better that it's replicated somewhere else, and as Mikko said, choose the cloud wisely. In some case, it might be better to keep things by yourself, but depends on the situation.
And maybe for the sake of practicality here, I would maybe add that I think it can be stated even as a kind of a fact that in Finland we do have a challenge here, because the way how we think at the moment is that there is only Finland and the rest of the world. We have essentially we have dichotomical categorization. Finland is the best, and the other countries are all equal in terms of confidentiality. And this, I think, would require a lot more thinking.
It sucks.
To really look at that, okay, do we have jurisdictions where we can actually minimize the risk for confidentiality, even if the data would be, let's say, classified as a higher level classification than the other.
Catharina.
But mind you that there have been some EU member states that have been caught red-handed for doing espionage on other EU member states. So,
correct. That is precisely what I meant. That it's definitely not something that we should sort of draw from our hat and say that, oh, okay, Western country fine, Eastern country not fine. Not like that. We would really need to sort of drill down into how it could be done and which jurisdictions are really maybe suitable. and why?
Yes. And so quick comment on that. It was interesting to hear sort of the opinion of Ukrainians about where they would like to have their data stored. And basically said, Baltic countries, too vulnerable. Poland, Czech Republic, great. Britain, France, Germany, no, they will sell us out if they need to. I would also very quickly like to follow up on, we were earlier talking about how some companies have now started to kind of become their own law. And that is a big debate. And that also falls into, in some countries and some cultures, some legislations, that's seen as a positive thing. And in some others, not. I mean, US, especially UK to some extent, really think, let the companies take care of this. Companies can do this better than the government. Whereas the European view is, of course, more, no, we can't let companies make decisions that basically we as a democratic organ should be making. But there's that view differs very much from different country to another. So that's probably also a factor. Do you have? Well, you don't need to comment on it, but if you.
Well, I can try to comment, especially because just before I arrived here, we had a similar discussion with our member companies. This question can be approached from many perspectives. One clear perspective is that companies operate with commercial and business logic. Like in Finland, if you read our regulation concerning stock companies with limited shares, it says that the purpose of a company is to produce financial value to their owners. Full stop.
Exactly.
That's what it says.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that is not the right approach to politics, because politics, like I mentioned, is about managing our common affairs for the better of the society. And hence, personally, at least, I'm a firm believer of the sort of European way of looking at this, that we have to take other values into consideration, and there is no one else who could do that if we don't have a public debate, public policy, and regulation made in accordance with that discussion. And this is one of the reasons why we are here, I hope and believe.
Yes. I'm trying to remember which science fiction author it was who had a book where one of the small side premises was that the UN had been replaced by the Internet Engineering Task Force. But
was that a horror sci-fi book?
No, it was a great scenario.
Utopia. All right, I see.
So this is from the livestream.com platform again, and this goes back to the big tech and their role in the conflict. Are you guys aware of any companies that are trying to resolve the issue and bring peace through means of conflict resolution or other methods?
Brief response from my side, I am not aware of any.
Me neither, and I don't really see that to be the role for companies either.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, our company has been doing work in Ukraine. The companies that I know are working in Ukraine and working with the Ukrainian government and Ukrainian public sector and Ukrainian companies and citizens are doing practical work fighting the cyber attacks and increasing defenses and bringing visibility to be able to detect new attacks better, which is very practical, concrete cyber defense work, far from trying to build a bigger picture, trying to build peace. Of course, everybody would love to see peace, but not at any cost, of course, but love to see peace. But I agree with Catharina, it's probably not the right place to be, it's not the right thing to be done by companies.
Thank you. So I would like to next move on to discussing maybe the sort of vulnerability of our infrastructure. And we've concluded that so far Russian cyber attacks haven't really caused any huge damage compared to all the scenarios that we could imagine happening with sort of electricity grid being taken down or sort of essential services being taken down, or even just denial of service on really essential services. And so I would like to hear your views about how vulnerable our infrastructure really is, sort of apart from all the myths about it, and sort of how realistic those attacks are at this point.
Hold on, do you mean here or in general?
Well, of course, I would like to bring the discussion to a slightly broader audience than just Finland.
Well, I already hinted to this when I mentioned the similarities in the decisions that our great-grandfathers did 150 years ago by embracing electricity, exactly in the same way we are now making decisions for future generations. Internet will be a mandatory part of our societies, and we are the ones making this decision for our children and their children. I'm not saying we shouldn't be making this call, because clearly our great-grandfathers made the right call by embracing electricity. It has brought much more good than bad, but we are now totally dependent on it, exactly in the same way we will become totally dependent on digital goods and services and the connectivity which is being built right now. It didn't exist 30, 40 years ago. We built it, and it will be a mandatory part of modern societies in the future. And when we try to defend the way modern societies work, one of the practical challenges we have is that critical infrastructure is in the hands of private companies, which makes it much harder for central management and central coordination of cybersecurity. It would be easy if governments would own everything, the way it used to be when we were in kingdoms, but it's not that easy at all anymore. And there, I do think there is a difference, big differences between different countries and different nations and how they do it. I do believe Finland is fairly well off in general understanding of responsibilities that companies have for national security. I believe Finnish companies have a better understanding of their responsibility for national security than most other nations do. And there's a couple of reasons that I believe are behind it. But overall, the outcome of that is good. And that's the kind of thinking, that's the kind of public-private partnerships that we really should be having in other countries as well.
Agree, and thank you, Mikko, actually, for opening up the possibility for me now to come to my favorite topic. And my favorite topic is usually that what does it mean to defend the sovereignty of a nation state also in cyberspace, like in the conventional spaces. And as we discussed earlier, the critical infrastructure is typically the main target for nation-based or nation-state cyber operations. And the critical infrastructures are owned by the private sector. So basically, yes, these companies, they do have the responsibility to, of course, take care of their own cybersecurity, and nobody's going to take this responsibility away from them. However, one thing that is crucial to understand is that a cyber attack that is kind of that you could compare it to conventional military attack can be considered an armed attack. And in that case, the country would have the right to defend itself. In some cases, the nation would even have an obligation to defend, let's say, if that attack was actually toward another country and is using your infrastructure. Anyway, what does this mean, that you have the right to defend yourself? Well, first of all, you need to be able to attribute, that is, to determine who is the aggressor, and also have the political will to attribute. You need to have a sense of what countermeasures you have available. They could be diplomacy, they could be sanctions, or it could be a response with a kinetic attack. Some larger nation states actually talk about using nuclear arms to defend themselves. And you have everything in between. But we need to have kind of a sense that what would be the possible countermeasures. Then you need to have this situational awareness that is kind of on a national level. So not only between the authorities, but also with the private sector. So here comes the public-private partnership again. You need to have your legislation that is up to date so that the authorities have the mandate to do something. Also, you need to have this international collaboration, and you need to have the command and control so that if and when such a large-scale attack would happen, you know how to operate. Now, the thing about talking about this, that you will defend your nation in case of an attack that is coming and probably hitting your critical privately owned infrastructure, is that it will make the threshold to attack much higher. And this is the same logic that comes to the defense of a nation in any case. So the idea is that if you attack us by conventional means or cyber means, we will respond. So think about if it's wise for you to do so, or do you have the resources to do so? And that would give an extra layer of protection to the critical infrastructure. So the critical infrastructure is not left alone to protect their own systems, but the nation may respond that, okay, you attack our critical infrastructure, we consider it an armed attack on our nation, and we will respond to that.
So what you're saying is we should develop the cyber equivalent of aircraft carriers and nuclear bombs.
I'm saying that we need to have this analogy when talking about cyber defense, that if you are making an attack on a country, does it really matter if you are destroying, let's say, the logistical systems by a missile or by a cyber attack, if the effect is the same?
Right.
So we should have this analogy in mind all the time.
Thank you. It's very easy to agree on this. I see also that there are some challenges in the way how we talk about these things, and that's essentially due to the fact that we are actually combining different professional fields, if I may use that term. That, for example, in political sciences, in diplomacy, there are certain ways to sort of maintain understanding of what these conventional spaces and other things are, and then we have the modern side where we have the engineering professions and other things like that, and that creates a challenge, because what Catharina is also saying is essentially, to put it in other terms, is about the question of deterrence. That is there some kind of deterrence in the cyberspace, and that is very difficult to understand and even to come to a conclusion, because if you want an easy answer, then the question is that, okay, if there is a cyber operation and the response would be in traditional kinetic weaponry, then it's rather easy to understand that there certainly is a deterrence, that if you make a cyber operation against us, we'll drop a nuclear device on you, to put it very simple. But other than that, the problem is that in political sciences, there is the understanding of defense is very narrow. Like Catharina was explaining it very well, maybe you saw and heard that there is very limited space for what is actually preventative activities. That how resilient our systems actually are, no matter what kind of cyber weapons there are. And that's one aspect which is missing from the discussion, from my perspective at least. And the second is the attribution. Attribution could be also divided into two different strands, it's about the technical attribution, that how can computer scientists and other professionals sort of find ways to pick up the hints and the evidences that who was behind of this operation and so on. But the other is the political attribution, which is it's actually a process of thinking the diplomatic or the sort of the diplomacy side of things, and making conclusions and determinations of costs and benefits and plus and minus and so on, and that can be much more difficult to do.
Mikko.
I think some of the most defining properties of cyber weapons are the deniability part and the ease of doing false flag attacks. That when you use these weapons, you can get comparable end results to traditional kinetic weapons, typically even cheaper to execute than what kinetic weapons would have required you to invest to get the same results. But then you can deny that it's not you. Or even better, you can put the blame on someone else, on another country, perhaps, which makes attribution even more critical. So if you're really going to be dropping, if someone's going to be dropping nuclear devices in retaliation of cyber attacks, you better be goddamn sure you really know who did it and it's not a false flag. And there's multiple different types of deterrence, but these properties, deniability and ease of doing false flag attacks, make deterrence or building deterrence with cyber weapons hard. To really build, I mean, the reason why we do traditional military parades is to show off the fighter jets and cruise missiles and whatever we have, tanks, so we seem more scarier, so no one comes knocking because they know we have all these weapons. Well, I've never seen a military parade with nerds and geeks and keyboards. It just
Maybe we should, but
well, okay. Let's think that through. Julf, let's think that through. Let's say we want to get deterrence with our geek squads and nerd battalions. It's not enough to show them in a parade, right? We need to show them in action. We need to actually build virtual war games, bring the world over to watch as they attack, I don't know, military defense targets and breach the security and disable them remotely. And actually, it's not enough to show that. We actually have to show exactly what we're doing. Like what is the vulnerability that we're exploiting? So it's real. It's not just make-believe. And that's something we can't do. Because unlike any other weapons, with cyber weapons, if we actually show what we actually do, then our enemies can copy it. And now they have the same weapon. And we can't do that. So building deterrence is goddamn hard when you can't show the real capabilities.
not at all. You just copyright or patent it. Sorry, yeah, first had question here and we have one remote.
Thanks. There seems to be a consensus that Russian cyber warfare has so far been somewhat underwhelming. Do you think that they are bringing their A game, or could it be that since they started the full-out conventional warfare, it became so low on the list of priorities that they are not using everything they have?
I'll start. Because I want to emphasize one thing, which I think we all agree here, which is that we're here to speak about cyber effects and internet and war. In Ukraine, clearly we've seen more cyber activity than in any other conflict before, but it's been such a small part of the big picture, and we shouldn't really be overemphasizing the importance of cyber attacks, because the real tragedies happen in the real world. And even though there's lots of things happening in the cyber world, they've been such a small part of this. Now, I don't think that the lackluster performance of Russian offensive cyber power in this war has been for the lack of trying. I think Russia is trying. I think it's really a question of Ukraine being able to defend itself. I think that's where the big difference comes from. Defend themselves by themselves with the experience they've built for 8 years in defending against real Russian cyber attacks, but also thanks to the help from the West. So I do think Russia is trying. And they have had successes. Like we've had financial networks down during this conflict in Ukraine. We've seen the border control computers crash under the wiping attacks in the very beginning of the war. But most of their attacks have been defended by Ukrainians and their friends.
Yeah. Additionally to what Mikko said, few things come to my mind as well. One is that if you look at any military operation, I think this is familiar to all of us, even from the war games that we can play on PlayStation or whatever. Is that, and if we look at also the news that we get every day from Ukraine, the more battlefronts there are, the thinner the force gets, and with the cyber dimension, I think we can all identify rather easily that there are 2 or even 3 fronts active at the same time. Russian resources are being utilized to the offensive operations in Ukraine. At the same time, the actors on the Russian side, they have to use their resources to defend themselves, and not only the military systems and other things, but also widely within society, because there's a lot of actors opposing and being active on the internet against Russia. And then at the same time, there are operations ongoing against other nation states as well, including Finland and others. So that is one aspect. It's only speculation, but because these are dependent on human resources, people and experts can't be multiplied. We can't copy a competent person. We have to wait until they grow, and sometimes it takes 50 plus years until they are really competent. So that's one aspect. The other thing is that these kinds of cyber operations, they certainly, and I'm not saying it's not something that you would have to be an expert of to be able to say that, but they are complex and complicated, because computer systems, as we all know, they change all the time. You get patches and changes, and vulnerabilities go and come, and all these. And if you want to have a serious impact, then you need a lot of things to go right at the right time. And it may also require a lot of time to prepare and develop not only the weapons themselves, but sort of set it up like we talk when we talk about malware, we talk about the actual payload, and we talk about the sort of platform or the delivery mechanism. So we need a lot of things, and it's not easy. It's not easy. The smallest thing can make it all futile and cause a non-disruption of services.
I'm going to be boring again and agree with with the previous speakers. But one thing that I still would like to add is that I don't think we should undermine what has been going on either, because there has been cyber attacks on the critical infrastructure with more or less impact, and also some impact outside of Ukraine. Of course, if you compare it to the human tragedy that is happening, then of course we can't speak on those in the same day. Also, there might be a lot of things that we don't know yet. So I think there's a lot of things that we will be analyzing later on, once and hopefully soon, that this war will be over. And I don't think we have seen everything yet, but maybe we have had larger expectations of Russia's capabilities that what has now proven. And as Mikko said, Ukraine also has had a lot of time to up their defenses when it comes to cyber attacks.
Great. Yeah, we have an online question here.
This question is actually mine, not from online. But anyway, I wanted to get back to what Mikko said about military parades and showing off military might and cyber might. I feel we already have something like this, because these days there are cyber war games. Well, there have been cyber war games for a decade or more. Got the highest score in one rather big cyber war game. So and I suppose they are being talked about now more often, just because of the reasons you said, that we need to show off that we have these prowess. And yeah, well, that was the question.
And it's a good point. Yeah, when we look at that kind of force, it is a fairly safe way of demonstrating your power. We can be pretty confident that there was actual real functioning exploits being used to reach the target in those war games or rehearsals. without exposing exactly what they were. So it's a safe way to show off your power. And if it's a competition between countries, of course, everybody wants to win. So you are bringing real capabilities onto the table, especially if you believe that you can do it safely without exposing your real skills to your enemies. Maybe that is a concrete example of building deterrence in the cyber domain.
It was the locked shields exercise that you were talking about that Finland now won, and one thing that is remarkable is that there was also reservists that were part of the Finnish team, so here we could again say the collaboration between the defense forces and the private sector, which is a good thing. Then when we are talking about deterrence and should we show parade our geeks in a military parade, well, first of all, there's a common misconception that the response to a cyber attack would also be another cyber attack, and this is not the case. This is what talked before about countermeasures, that they can be everything from diplomacy and sanctions to kinetic means. But of course, it can also be a cyber operation. But okay, would you like to show the geeks off? There's another reason why you should not do that, and that is because then these people become targets. So somebody goes and shoots them before they leave their front door.
Certainly. So that is
I hate the way you think.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And also talking about the sort of military show off in the traditional sense, the parades and other things, and of course there's much more to it. It's not only the parades. Of course, nation states visit each other's and survey openly and by means of various state agreements to evaluate or visit the military capabilities. Well, one thing which we can, I think, it might be too early, but I'm courageous and I'll say this already now that the top-notch capabilities, they nowadays rely quite a lot on the technological aspects of even kinetic weapons. We all have read the news from our yellow press concerning the anti-tank missiles and things like that, and you can see what the difference is, be it US-made, Swedish-made, or something that was made or designed in the late 70s. You can see what that actually means when one sees the horrible news photos when the burned corpses are flying out from the tanks and so on. And that also is something that it's not really shown in the sense of military parades and so on. So it's not about the persons themselves. It's not the soldiers themselves only. It's not the special forces person who looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger and of course combats on his own against a full battalion or something like that. Then the other issue is concerning coming back to the deterrence question. That would that be even these war games and so on? Would that create deterrence? I'm not sure. Would it do that in an adequate level at least? And furthermore, thinking about what makes the difference. Catharina already spoke about the sort of doctrinal side of that. Okay, what is a given nation state going to do if they become a target of serious, severe cyber operation? That's one issue. On the other side of that is all of us, the international community, all the societies in the world. Unfortunately, we don't have a solid, or actually I should say that we almost have no international regulative framework on what would be the responsible state behavior in this scenario, and that's really challenging. And now the circle in a way comes back to the point of that. Okay, would UN then create one? Well, it hasn't been successful so far. And I'm thinking that it will not likely be in the near future, but this has to sort of, we all have to work towards it, even just any one of us as an individual, to sort of start thinking about what kind of internet do we want.
I think that deterrence doesn't come from clearly specifying what we will do and where the threshold is. Actually, the trick of the trade is to not do it, because if you first of all define a threshold, then it's easy for an adversary to just operate under the threshold. And also, I don't think that we should put into stone that what our response will be. The important message is there will be a response. What response then depends on the situation on case-by-case basis. But this is kind of a homework that we have to do, and I think the foreign ministry had actually written a very good paper on Finland's kind of thinking about cyberspace and so on. So I think it was written 2 years ago. But one of the reasons why we should think about it again comes to the fact that we have just also applied to NATO, and maybe, hopefully, one day we will be NATO members. And now we're coming to Article 5. NATO has recognized that a cyber attack can also evoke Article 5, so that's a possibility. And we need to also nationally think that what would this mean for us, what would it mean in our case. So this is a discussion that we cannot escape. NATO, of course, then does the decision on a case-by-case basis, as it does when it comes to conventional attack. And in any case, Article 5 has only been evoked once in NATO's history. So there is no clear, answers to when, how, and what at the moment.
And may I add, it has that or any other responses. No war has been ever concluded out of any cyber operation so far.
Yeah. Did you want to respond?
Yeah. So first of all, the last few comments reminded me of a comment that I saw online in the livestream.com platform, very, very near the beginning of this whole session. Nelly Deutsch says that, I agree we are to blame for standing by and letting the innocent suffer. We must have a world justice system that deals with corrupt leaders, and there's a clear message out there that puts us all at risk. And then another point from my own point of view regarding the discussion is that we've in this discussion we've focused a lot on the cyber attacks that have been targeted at Ukraine and also at other EU countries and maybe some in Finland as well. But especially near the beginning of the whole conflict, there were actually much bigger cyber attacks against Russia, and those made headlines. And it also, at least, seemed to me that their defenses were way weaker than Ukraine's defenses against what Russia was directing toward Ukraine. I don't know if it's partially because suddenly Western companies that had the means to shield Russian networks withdrew those means from Russia. So maybe their firewalls were suddenly out of licenses or whatever. Do you have something you can say about this?
One thing which is clear when we try to measure the effects of any of the cyber attacks that we've seen over the last 3 months is the fog of the cyber war. We have a lack of visibility. It's very hard to confirm whether some of these attacks that we see reported really happened or not, and or whether they really had the effects that are claimed, or whether some of the data leaks we're seeing are real or fabricated. We will learn eventually, but it's surprisingly hard. I'll give you a practical example. I was speaking to a Dutch journalist who was picking up his aunt from Kyiv in the beginning of the war. He left Amsterdam to go to Kyiv on the 22nd. He was trying to fly out on the 24th of February, the day the war broke out. He spent all day at the Kyiv International Airport, unable to fly out because of computer problems at airlines and at the airport terminals. And I've been trying to confirm this simple fact for 3 months now. Like, were they hit by Hermetic Viper, which was the Russian wiping attack, which did a lot of damage on the first day of the war, or something else? And you would think we would know by now, but we don't. So it's surprisingly hard to confirm some of the aspects of these attacks. Now, for the last 3 months, we've also seen big headlines on stories about attacks on Russian infrastructure, typically done by Western volunteers, hacktivists. Anonymous gets all the headlines, but it's only one of the roughly 60, 70 groups that we know are attacking Russian infrastructure to support Ukraine. Many of these attacks are just denial of service attacks, but even DOS attacks do actually become problematic when they hit the right targets. But there's much more than just that. We've seen reports about the biggest Russian banks getting hit. Roskomnadzor, the biggest regulator in telecoms, getting hit. Russian central bank getting hit. The Orthodox Church getting hit. Several of the ministries getting hit. And hundreds of gigabytes of information being leaked from these. And I've downloaded some of these leaks and looked at them, and they certainly look convincing and real to me. But I can't confirm any of these hits. That did these really happen? Is this real? Or is this information operations? And then there's the added complexity in all of this. I just told you that this is civilians attacking West. Well, is it? Or are the attacks of Anonymous and friends opening up windows of opportunities for Western intelligence and military agencies to use their nation-state force against Russian targets? Because right now they would be free to do that. Even if they get caught, they could just blame Anonymous. Because there's so much fog in the air right now. I'm confident that we'll eventually find out the details of what was true and what wasn't, what really did happen and what did not. But right now it's kind of complex, and I guess that's what wars look like when they are underway.
I'm looking forward to seeing the Hollywood movie in 15 years.
With Brad Pitt.
Yes.
But I would actually like to continue about the hacktivists in warfare, because if you think about, let's say that you're a fighter and you go to Ukraine physically and you participate in the war, that you can do. But then we have this issue of hacktivists operating from their home couches in countries that are not Ukraine. And I think this is actually a discussion that probably we have to have when the dust has settled, because everyone understands the hacktivists that they want to help Ukraine, but it's not completely unproblematic either. And it's not only about, doing this kind of cyber activities that it's a crime, but what if, again, the impact of these actions would severely affect the civilian population in Russia? Then are we talking about war crimes? Are they committing war crimes? Another issue is, of course, also that, let's say that they are doing these things and they are not in sync with what the Ukrainian armed forces are doing. Could they probably mess up some cyber operation that the Ukrainian armed forces are doing, and it that way kind of hinder the defense, which probably was not what they intended to do? Then a third issue is, again, let's say that if your infrastructure is being used towards another nation, then the nation has the responsibility to respond. So are we now creating a situation where, let's say that Finland would actually have to respond to the Finnish activists operating from Finland towards Russia, and in that way kind of creating a conflict between our experts and our government? It would be kind of sad. And also, could, for example, Russia use this, as I think you used this called Mainilan tweets, that kind of use it as an excuse that, hey, you are attacking us, so now we have the right to respond. So could this be used as an excuse? So there are a lot of questions about hacktivism in warfare that do not have any answers yet, but I think that they need to be thoroughly discussed.
Certainly so. And if I would continue what you said, we already have the mechanisms and the rules in place and in force. For example, if any person here in Finland would be a part of this these kinds of activists, if the authorities here in Finland would become aware at, let's say, reasonable level of these actions, they would have to investigate. There is no way out of this. And second issue is that I can see that we are coming quite often we are sort of touching base on those issues that make the digital environment completely different from our real world, so to say, the world of atoms. And that is that the fundamentals are different. That if you want to be an activist in terms of defending Ukraine in the world of atoms, you can organize a demonstration here in Finland, or wear a tie with the Ukrainian flag colors, or something like that. And those are all legal means to do. But if you want to do more, for example, engage in a physical fight against the oppressor, in this case Russia, you would have to actually travel to Ukraine. You would really have to go there and get the short military training and be given a formal position and make the contract with the government that you are a combatant of Russian defense forces. Sorry. Thanks. Apologies for that. So you would have to do all that. But when in the internet, when the internet is at war, there is no time, there is no distance, there's no actual borders between nation states and so on. You can do all this by just thinking that, hey, I have some skills, so I will participate and start doing things. But it doesn't change the fact that where you physically are, that's where you are liable, or where the consequences occur. So if you do something that happens in Ukraine, in Russia in this case.
Whose side are you on?
I don't know. Maybe I'm switching sides here, but that I can guarantee that is a mistake if I'm doing that. So you're also breaching Russia's law, and there are mechanisms for state cooperation, even in times of this, for example, between Finland and Russia. So there, it's all those exist, and the future would not look good for anyone engaging in a serious activity, and especially because Mikko so well said that if we want any proof of anything, somebody would have to disclose the sort of process and the narrative that who did what. And that is the moment when the consequences also would start to occur for those individuals themselves. So I think many activists would understand that it's better just to leave the data somewhere in a public server and say nothing.
Did you want to follow up on that? Because
As an online.
okay, let's quickly take that then.
So someone on the stream asks, Brad Smith of Microsoft has called for a Cyber Geneva Convention. Is that practical or useful?
Well, I think there is already an understanding, especially if you look at the Tallinn manuals, that the Geneva Convention applies also in cyberspace.
Pasi, you want to?
Yeah, maybe I can continue with that. Although all true in that sense, the challenge with that is the fact that the sort of transposing the mechanisms and the sort of cognitive understanding of how the world works in the digital environment, we are not yet there. I don't know if we need a new convention to say the same things as the old convention said, only adding the word digital everywhere. Not sure if we need that, but we certainly need more clear understanding of the proper state behavior in the digital environment.
I could give a couple of practical examples of what these could look like. For example, joint understanding that when nation states deploy malware, that malware must not continue working forever. There must be a kill date programmed inside of it, sort of like you would like have landmines which would stop detonating after the war. Or a way to prove when you're using exploit or malicious code, whose code is it with, I don't know, public key signature blocks inside the code, which you could maybe after the conflict prove that this was ours and this was yours. Things like that. Sort of like in the real world, you have to wear a flag of the country you're fighting for. Plenty of things like technical details we could do, which we aren't doing at the moment, but I guess one day we will.
I see.
In the Azerbaijan-Armenian conflict, we saw one of the first times these loitering munitions, which were autonomous drones without any human control, dropping explosives on troops and personnel carriers. And my question is that why haven't we seen this in the Ukrainian conflict now? Because most of the even most advanced drones like the Bayraktar or Global Hawk or Predator, they are human control from large containers. So there is always somebody on watch. So are we hesitating with those in warfare? And how will this be in the next 20, 40 years?
Anyone willing to take a cut?
Well, I think, I don't know the answer, but I do think we should, as a mankind, we should hesitate when we make the leap from killing each other into having robots kill us, or robots make the decision on who to kill and who to let live. We can only really make that decision, like we can only cross that threshold once. It is pretty important threshold to cross, but it's quite clear that unless we fight against that development, it's going to happen automatically. And if you look at drones, which have been used in warfare for 20 years now, and like you said yourself, most of them, or practically all of them right now, are human controlled. We would have the technology to have them fly themselves, find the target by themselves, make the decision by themselves, kill by themselves. But we like to be in control. But the problem, which is obvious to anybody who's following this field, is that it's so easy to disrupt the operations, because there has to be a link to the drone if you want to control it by a human. And electronic warfare and cyber attacks will always enable you to disrupt that link. So the obvious solution to that is to kill the link and just have it do it by itself, pre-program it to do the things and make the decisions by itself. And it seems like a small step to take, but it actually is a big step to take. And I don't know why we haven't seen this yet from countries that you would think would be making this jump easier than, for example, we would do. But I'd like to think it's because we're hesitating, because I think it's the right thing to hesitate about.
Yeah, there is a discussion on the ethics of these autonomous killings, and of course we could go even further and go to this kind of Terminator scenarios, that what if they start to then turn against us completely.
I wouldn't blame them.
So yes, there is an ethical discussion about whether you can have autonomous weapons. And also, if you look at the drones that are being operated by people, it's not completely unproblematic either. I mean, there you have the operator who is killing people from remote and then goes home and it's dinner with the family. But it has been shown that even these people operating remote also can have stress syndromes that you might notice in people who are actually doing combat. So I think it would only be a step in a worse direction if you then even take away that level of human reaction to killing other human beings.
Actually, let me just quickly, there is a wonderful movie about that called Eye in the Sky. Definitely recommended seeing, exactly about that scenario.
Yeah, it's what Catharina said brought me to once again to some of the fundamentals, and in this case, fundamentals of humanity. We have many opinions on this, but what I can attest to is that human beings are not bad as a species. Our civilization is not a thin foil on the gruesome nature and our killing nature of humanity. That has been shown rather well, although of course the popular media and the movies and other things, they claim the contrary all the time. So we have a tendency on believing the Hollywood story instead of this. But nevertheless, having humans in control is a better option, because then we have this kind of the control layer of humanity. But this, at the same time, to the extent of our topic here and the internet and cyber security, I'm also keen on sort of drawing the line to the element what Mikko mentioned about the connection between the drone and that's still cyber. If the drone or whatever weapon is fully autonomous and it has AI components and things like that, that certainly is digital, but it's not really maybe cyber security. And I'm a bit hesitant on sort of going further on this.
Well, as you actually sort of in this somewhat gloomy discussion had a positive note, I think that would be a good ending note for this panel. So I really want to thank you all three for a wonderful panel, and the people out there on the net for good questions. Thank you, everybody. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.